friends, and welcome to Quartet. I'm joined today for our discussion by the full complement of our quartet. Penny Kelly, nice to have you with us.
Hi there. It's good to be here.
Nice.
Hello to everybody out there, and you too, Greg and Kingsley.
And Kingsley Dennis from the UK. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm good, thanks. Hi, Penny, Greg, and everyone. It's good to be back wherever I am.
And Greg Braden, nice to see you again.
It is so good to be here. I am beyond epic today, and I'm really excited. I'm excited just to have the whole crew back together. It's just really nice. So
this is Quartet. This is a deep dive into serious kind of issues that are related to the big change that's going on in the world today. And we're going to talk today about how you become sovereign. But let's start by running around the table and see what you've been thinking about. Greg, what's been on your mind?
Wow, there's so much that's on my mind right now. I'm in awe at the push for war and how there appears to be no desire to curb the wars that are to come. And it was interesting, the Pentagon came out 2 weeks ago with they did a modeling and an assessment. And to some people's surprise, they said the United States is not capable of fighting a multi-front war with conventional weapons right now. We've depleted our resources. Here on the home front, we've talked a lot about fifth generation warfare, the kind of warfare that begins, it's a psychological warfare before or if it ever even becomes kinetic. And that warfare is playing out in full sight with this election season. And when we see the media and the ads and the marketing, they don't even try to tell the truth anymore, John. They're flat out lies. You can fact check them depending on where your fact checks come from, but the information and the way it's being presented is designed, it's not about the good things that either party can do, it's about the bad things that will happen if you don't support that party. And they're really drilling in on the primal aspects of fear and popularity. It's a popularity contest. And sadly, it's becoming very effective. It's tearing the country apart, even more than it has been. And both those things have been on my mind. I'll stop right there.
Kingsley, what do you think?
Well, I don't really think, John, because here in Great Britain, life under Comrade Starmer is very good. We don't need to think. In fact, I can tell you that agricultural policies are up 5%, labor's up 10%, economic efficiency has increased. The 5-year plan is going very well, thanks to our Comrade Starmer. Wait. Oh, yes, the drone has just left my window. Thank God for that. And I can see that I've just received some upgrade on my social credit score. So I can now go out and buy yesterday's bread to feed my family today. Life under Comrade Starmer is very good indeed. In fact, he's so compassionate. Comrade Starmer has passed a new emergency law, and he wants to put criminals out onto the street from the prison, take them away from their homes to make room for cognitive dissidents who are saying things on social media. So I think it's very good that Comrade Starmer is actually putting criminals out on the street and giving a new home to us cognitive dissidents. So life is good there. And I have a new guest because I've got a visit from my old friend Pox. Pox has come around again. And he's recently been visiting his friends at the WHO who sent him on a world tour. So he's just popping in on the world tour. So as you can see, John, I have nothing on my mind at the moment.
Penny Kelly.
Oh my, I have so much on my mind. The first thing that he keeps coming up for me, I keep noticing, is things that have to do with the planet. The earthquakes that are suddenly much bigger, stronger. The magnetic field drop. I mean, it's becoming really dramatic. The slowing of the, what do they call that? The Atlantic meridional oscillating current. that's critical. Oh my gosh. And then the increasing signs of the pole shift and the solar flash. That just, I don't know why I keep running into that, but I do. So that's been on my mind. The increasing attempts, crazy, stupid attempts to get Russia to do something wild and crazy, attempts to get a big war going, the Ukrainian attempts to destroy the 2 nuclear power plants, or to get access to be able to threaten Russia by having access to those 2 power plants. One's in Kursk, where they just invaded in Russian territory, and the other one's in Zaporizhia. And that's like, they don't really care about the rest of the world. And Ukraine just keeps doing things that are dumb and dumber. The next thing that's on my mind is Xi Jinping seems to have disappeared. He hasn't been seen in public since July. The report was that he had a stroke, but the under the table report is that China is in the midst of a coup. So that's been like, holy cow. And the last thing is the fall of globalization and the fallout that is coming for those countries who were really on board with that. But been watching a lot of things and not liking much.
Right now it's time for questions. Richard Tyson comes and says, I'm confused, and it's just contradictory and frightening. And he goes down through a list of you. On one hand, you say don't live in fear. And then you have a list of all these things, famine, volcanoes, and so on. And so what in the world are we supposed to do? How do we live in fear? Love and joy, and yet we talk about fear. Well, let me take a run at that. If you want a metaphor for this, as a hurricane inbound, and you live on the coast in the United States on the East Coast. This thing has been identified, and it's out there 500 miles or 750 miles away, and it's headed inbound. The question is, would you like to know about it if you are on the East Coast? Because they're doing these projections, and they're saying that it's probably coming your way. Don't know exactly where it's going to be, but it's inbound. And by the way, you should prepare. You can take a couple points of view or positions on that, and people do in the situation of hurricanes. Some of them say, I'm just going to sit here, forget it. I'm not going to worry about it. It may not show up. I mean, it happens every time one is coming in. And you can do that. You can choose to do that. On the other hand, you can look at that, and you can monitor the information as it progresses. And you can use that in order to decide how that you can most effectively deal with a situation that's about to emerge. Particularly if you see that it's going to really come over the top of your head, then you may choose to take heed the warnings that are kind of rampant from the government, and you can head off somewhere else where the problem is less severe. This is not unlike a hurricane in that you need to prepare for it. And by the way, if you choose not to turn on the radio or the internet or whatever, and you get surprised by this event, you do not see it coming, then you will be driven into extraordinary fear. If you operate out of that space, then you lose your ability to do regular effective cognitive kind of responses and think, and you are in far worse shape than you otherwise would have been. And so this is like an inbound hurricane, and we need to know about this. And so that's why I think this preparation and what we're trying to do. Let me just finish and say that the way you do this is you do it with your head and not your heart. Is that you look at this thing kind of abstractly as an event, and you say, what have I got to do? You don't engage emotionally in it, and you sit there and worry and all of that. So please.
Yeah, John, you said that beautifully, and I didn't know if I was muted. You said that beautifully, and I think, Richard, I understand that question, and I hear that question from people not just in America, but all over the world. I'm not sure where you're coming from. You've heard the adage, knowledge is power. And this is one of those places we as a society have been conditioned to hinge our sense of well-being on the world around us. You're living in a time, my brother, and we all are, where that world, the unstable, the unsustainable parts of that world are coming apart at the seams. So if you're relying on the outer world for your sense of well-being, it can be a very challenging time. This is why we are emphasizing inner knowledge. The better we know ourselves, the less we fear change in the world. It doesn't change what happens out there, but it changes how we respond. The better you know yourself, the less you fear your own power. And I think ultimately, all of the things that you've listed here and all the things we're talking about are an invitation for us to step into our own power so that we can navigate incoming in a healthy way.
This is not a time for being comfortable and sinking into what I'm going to call the ruts of the norm that we've enjoyed. This is a time for paying attention, and you have to be realistic.
Kingsley?
After everything you've said about being prepared, having the attention, I mean, I would just add, it's important to realize the intention of the person transmitting the news. I mean, in the quartet, we are trying to be of assistance. We're trying to provide some information that can be of benefit. And so to think that we're trying to promote fear, if we're talking about these subjects, doesn't align with our intentions. And I think it's very important, if you're gaining information or you're receiving information, also try to discern what's the intention of the people giving it. Is it to provide preparation? Is it to allow attention? Or is it to engage with emotions or fear?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, all of you. This is certainly a time where we have to rise to the occasion. So that leads us to our topic of today. When you look at the essential kind of character of this possible world going forward, all the alternative scenarios and such, what you find out is, on one hand, that there is this great kind of effort, highly funded, very sophisticated, to essentially control human beings using technology primarily, and essentially in increasingly sophisticated ways through social media and search engines and satellites and any number of other kind of techniques, is to get a hold of and constrain the behavior and the options of everybody on the planet going forward. I generally talk about it as being a path toward technocracy, where to the technical people kind of run everything through AI and any number of other the technologies. The other path is not about control, but is about freedom. And it's about personal freedom, and it's about the evolution of the species, and an evolutionary jump and awakening, and all of these different kind of terms that we use for a major change in who we are and how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And the kind of key to that, it has to do with this idea of sovereignty. That in fact, we are surrounded by systems starting immediately after we're born, familial and social and educational and religious and governmental and science, and all these kind of systems, all of which shape in a very systematic and overt kind of way, try to shape who we are and how we think. And they effectively kind of build a onion-like set of insulators kind of around us to keep us away from the essence of who we are. And that's been developed over thousands of years now. And we're now at the place where we can kind of unleash the constraints of all of these systems that have been so developed with such sophistication, such capabilities, and we can begin to embrace the underlying power and capabilities that we have. Now, the notion of sovereignty, that in fact we are not dependent upon all of these other systems, that we can make decisions on our own. The notion of sovereignty at its basis has to do with thinking for yourself. That is to say, being able to critically engage in the face of all of this uncertainty and this amazing kind of technology and breakthrough things and unreality, and you know, it just goes on and on. And on one hand, they're trying to kind of surround you with this technically generated narrative to drive you out down this path of control. And on the other hand, though, is this unleashing, disconnecting from that whole system. And at the center of it is making decisions for yourself and not by these outside forces and that are all trying to tell you what to do and constrain who you are. So how do you do that? How do you get to that kind of a place where you kind of effectively disconnect from all of what has surrounded us and defined us and shaped us as we've grown up and lived to the point where we are? How do you start to systematically disconnect from all of that? This is a really, really big deal. And it is a key, and it's at the crux of the mindset shift that needs to be here. And it's hugely empowering in terms of who you are as individuals and how we are as human beings, to suddenly make that shift from one side to the other. So our question today and our topic today is, how is it that that in a short period of time, relatively short period of time, with those individuals who are ready, who are on the fence kind of, and they're searching and ready, how do we encourage folks to become independent, to become empowered, to become someone fundamentally different, to see themselves in the world in a different way and realize that they can make their own decisions, and they need to, in terms of evaluating everything and making that's incoming, as well as deciding what they're gonna do. And so, Greg, can we start with you?
We talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty's it's a state of mind, and when we are seeing ourselves in relationship to the world, if we have allowed ourselves to be manipulated to the point where all of our sense of well-being hinges on what the government does and what our county does and what the authorities do, when those things begin to shift, and sometimes not in our best interest, we are vulnerable because we have given away our power. We've given away that sovereignty. The question you asked specifically is, what steps can we take to either open or regain that sense of sovereignty? For some people, they've never had it, although I think it is our truest nature. But some people were born into a sense of dependency because of their environment. And for others, they lost that over time. It is not unlike deprogramming, psychological deprogramming from a cult. And this is literally, it's a technological cult. We have been entrained to be mesmerized by the technology. and to allow other people to interpret the events of the world and tell us how to respond and what to think about those. There are three different tactics of indoctrination that we can break away from to regain that sovereignty. The first one is when information is presented to us, excuse me, as the information is presented to us as the reality. And the way that that happens is if we receive our information online, the algorithms pick up what it is that we search for, and then they will go into the World Wide Web and pull only the information that reflects that viewpoint. Our inbox then is inundated with all these different sources telling us the same thing. And it's so pervasive, John, we begin to think everybody else is seeing what we're seeing and everybody else thinks the same way, and it must be true. The remedy for that is to begin to unplug from that kind of technology. We've talked about that before, and that remedy is going to be true for all three of the things I'm saying here, but to do our own research, to look for original sources, and this is really important. If it's about a biological issue, if it's about a climatological issue, if it's about an economic issue, don't listen to a pundit to tell you what to think. Go to the technical papers, go to the science papers, and see what it is they're saying, and you'll often see a big discrepancy there. So that is one of the first tactic of indoctrination. The second one, and this is insidious, it is to be manipulated through fear and guilt. And I'm going to give an example here of climate. And this is where it gets really tricky. Climate change is a fact. We all know that there are things that are changing. The tactic is to show us all of the horrible things that have happened, all the fires, all the damage, the homes lost, people that are killed. It's all real. And while we are empathizing with that, then to make us feel guilty that the choices we've made in our lives are responsible for the horrible things that we're seeing. And this is very, very effective because people are good people and they don't want to see other people suffer. And this is a tactic that is being used. It's being used on a global basis right now. Again, manipulation through fear and guilt. We have to ask ourselves, is what we're being told, is it true? The third tactic is when we're being confronted with information and we're being told there's a sense of urgency and there's no way out. We saw this when it came to the pandemic. We had to think one way, there was no time to do anything else, or everybody's going to die. We've literally had our elected officials, when it comes to climate, tell us if we don't think the way they're thinking, the world ends, literally ends in 10 years. And there are young people that believe that and are very vulnerable to that. So, and nobody wants that. So the key is to wean ourselves from the godspell of the technology and the slick marketing and the manipulation to be able to recognize when it happens, number one. Number two, stop relying on other people to tell us how to think. This is precisely what you said in your introduction. We need to go and be open to alternative sources of information, maybe some sources that we wouldn't have looked at in the past, not to embrace them, but to recognize that there are different viewpoints. And rather than relying on a single source of information, now that we know that in the United States, all the media we're looking at is owned by 6 corporations. Those 6 corporations are beholden to a couple of institutions that are driving the narratives. It is a form of deprogramming, John, because I can't give you the date that it happened, but it was right around 9/11, in that period of time, where the way news is presented to us shifted from the Walter Cronkite era of information that we could interpret to the commentary to tell us how to think about what was happening. And so we are all victims in some sense. We're all casualties of what this is, a form of 5th generation warfare. This is precisely what 5Gen warfare is all about. We are all casualties to some degree, and we are only victims and defined by our past if we choose to be defined by our past. You can make a choice right now and move forward with new ways of thinking.
It's also built into the processes and the systems and the structure of the system. Penny, what do you think?
Whoa, well, I had lots of how-tos, some of them easy, some of them not so easy. So the first one, if we weren't really, and this cannot be done in a short time, when you have to, as Greg said, deprogram, unplug from all of that earlier programming without a big shock, without a debilitating period in which you just don't know what to think and who to go to, and you're just lost. It seems to me that we could avoid that whole problem if we took the infrastructure, the internet infrastructure that we have, and there was a mass, I hope I don't sound like a communist here, re-education program, a program or a series of programs. And I have to say, I know some people who are setting that up right now. They're going to begin the re-education of the planet, of the people on the planet, getting to the truth of what's happening. The truth very often has this amazing reaction in the human being. There's this whole body, whole mind, knowing that, oh, that strikes me, that feels, those are the words people use, that feels like it's right. And that then triggers an opening that can, if supported and nurtured, would result in a whole different kind of approach. Some people would say, oh, that's red pill. You're red pilling people. You can red pill people, but by gosh, you better be ready to support them afterwards and to help walk them through all the difficulties that they're having. So those are the first three. We would have an immediate, I'm going to say, like coming to sovereignty if there was a collapse of national government. And the way that I see the world going right now, it's like, wow, it's really shaky. So that collapse of authority in the form of national government is just going to leave people dangling. Another thing would be the seeding of regional leaders. The recognition would be another way of saying it, of regional leaders that people could gather around and say, okay, some people will say, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do and I'm going to do it because I don't know what to do and I need to do something before I go nuts. So that whole seeding of regional leaders would be a big step toward people quickly becoming more sovereign and reestablishing their own inner authority. If we maintain communication over the internet and use it wisely, that's a big piece of what could, kind of boot or give a kick in the rear to that whole process of sovereignty being reseeded in people. If we had journalists or pundits or internet people who wrote, spoke, and seeded new ideas that really made sense and were timely and based on what are people needing, what are they going through right now, that tends to reestablish sovereignty and authority. A little permission to do what makes sense goes a long way. The next thing is necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. If we need to take charge of ourselves, we're going to take charge of ourselves. It would be messy, but the easiest one is to rethink the education system and develop that personal sovereignty right from kindergarten on up. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, very good. The old system by definition has to collapse or implode or something. You can't think differently by thinking in traditional kind of ways. This is all about the reorganization of the whole thing. Kingsley?
Well, thank you, John and Penny and Greg. And I think we've already you've touched upon the idea that to to try to get at the concept of sovereignty, we have to realize that we're in a kind of a realm of indoctrination. And, and really that indoctrination has come through the creation of the consensus reality. And it's that breakdown of consensus reality that allows the notion of sovereignty to become more in focus right now. And I think you're right, Penny, when you mentioned it's not, not necessarily a quick process. In fact, I mean, throughout history, these notion of control and freedom that you touched upon, John, that's been paramount through all of kind of human history and how to maintain that. And in fact, in the ancient kind of wisdom schools, the notion of initiation was basically before you initiate someone into wisdom, you had to decondition them. And often you had to take a person out of society, and it would perhaps for some people take their whole life, even if they didn't reach it in one lifetime. So deconditioning has been a long process. However, I think one of the benefits of this turmoil that we're going through is that it's accelerating the ability of the process of deconditioning. And there's been certain trigger points. I think more recently, a lot of people had their consensus reality splintered or cracked with 9/11, and then the 2008 financial collapse, and then 2020. So these actual discomfort, traumatic trigger points are actually helping to also to crack the egg of the consensus reality. And so the focus of sovereignty has come to the fore. And interestingly, I've also seen in 2020, when everything erupted, there was a lot of physical protests in Australia, well, in many places, but I remember in Australia specifically, the media actually used the word sovereign individuals, but they used it in a negative sense. They said, look at these rioters and protesters against the lockdown. These kind of sovereign individuals are kind of breaking down the social bonds. And so, of course, we know that if you try to own the language and vocabulary, you try to get an advantage on the kind of the narrative. So they try to say two things there. One is that to be sovereign individual is a negative thing against your fellow people. And the second thing was that if you are a sovereign individual, what do? You go and protest against the system. And that's two implanted ideas. So for me, the question of sovereignty is really a question of power. The power that others have over you, or the power that you have over yourself. And I think the notion of power has come up several times here. And external power, one of the definitions of external power is the external power aims to perpetuate powerlessness over the powerless, which means that kind of external power sees people as being powerless. And that is perpetuated through a lot of these conditioning systems. Whereas sovereign power can be identified as that power which aims to influence one's capacity of perception and discernment. So anything which kind of develops and influences one's own capacity of perception and discernment. So one of the things about sovereignty is, as you mentioned, Greg, it's about the critical ability to discern the information which is coming to us. So look at how the information and the energetics of the information is tried to be pushed upon us. And it's very emotional. It's the kind of information and the external impacts that media is putting over us is trying to get us to overly emotional engage in it. In fact, even to kind of push back and to resent it, to be very angry. But of course, the more angry we become, often we're giving away the power. Again, it's that power kind of relationship. We're giving it away. And you mentioned that word, Greg, about we should choose not to be victims. I think victimhood is also a kind of tactic strategy to take away the power from us. If we believe ourselves to be victims, then we feel powerless. And also that notion of revolt, as I mentioned a minute ago, the idea that if we're sovereign individuals, we should revolt and push back, that's That's a kind of manipulated seed that is not, in my notion, is not correct. A sovereign individual has the power to choose how to act, not to automatically push back against the system. That's a kind of automatic conditioning reaction. It's the power to choose how to behave in any given circumstance. So we may choose not to react. In my perspective, one of the true act of revolt is an act of sanity, to keep your sanity in a crazy world. That's the true revolution. And another way of giving away the sovereignty is the notion of obedience to authority. The idea of obedience to authority actually, if we're not careful, takes away our authenticity, because again, we externalize everything. So for me, the sovereign individual is to learn how to come back to our authentic self, which means really being genuine, not having fear to own your truth, to own your thinking, even if other people are going to, be critical against that. So external dependencies is what takes away your power. External salvationism. Again, there's a lot of narratives by saying you will be saved by something, someone, some being, some group external to you. External salvationism. Once you adopt that narrative and think, I'm going to be saved, that just, boom, drops down your own sovereign, your own authenticity straight away. And that can reflect back to our own authentic sovereign self to step away from that.
Yeah, good points. Very interesting. And so we have possibilities and options. And so that is then starts to say, so in that context of still having this ability to dance, to kind of come over to the right side, to start to rebuild your idea of who you are, how does that happen? Well, again, I like the idea of initiation. That's a very interesting and powerful kind of term that describes a transition from literally one era to another one. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do know that in the Native American traditions, I mean, they'd take young men of certain age and they'd send them out in the wilderness for 3, 4, 5 days at a time and somehow they've got to make do and come back. And the process is that you become a new person, right? That's why this idea of initiation is so powerful here, is because you can see across the bridge, across the event that's in your face, you can see that it's going somewhere else, and you're going to be graduated or certified or bar mitzvahed or whatever you end up being an adult after that. So it's a really fundamental kind of change. The thing that sustains you going forward is the vision of what the new future might be. That's every initiation. Nobody goes into an initiation not feeling that they're going to come out of it and it's going to be better at that, that you're going to be an adult or whatever the situation is, or a mace, whatever the example that you want to use. You start to provide alternatives, and you provide alternative pictures and processes. I tried to do that once here on one of these events that we were broadcasting, and I said back in the COVID time, I don't work for the governor. I don't have to do what the governor tells me to do. And I get all this hate mail coming back saying, well, he's the governor, you got to do. No. The point is you don't have to. And I was just trying to make that point so that somebody could see that you could have that degree of independence.
I think a big enough mass of people are taking back their sovereignty, and I can sense a change in the greater population. But the idea is you make a choice, you make a decision, and then you don't just revolt. You step back and you say, how should I revolt? What kind of activity does that personal revolution look like, sound like, feel like? And most importantly, what is the timing that will make that most successful?
Yeah, I agree, Penny, and Kingsley, thank you for you were like bookends and the way that all that information just came together. I I agree, Penny and Kingsley. I think it could, under normal circumstances, take a long time to go through the deprogramming. I think we're on the fast track. And the reason I think that, and I'm seeing this as I'm out in the world, that the people are losing faith and losing trust in the systems so quickly that they're pretty much saying you can't believe anything. You can't believe anything on the news. You can't believe anything from the president. You can't believe anything. They don't know what to believe. And what that does is it puts you into a space where if you're going to survive, you've got to start thinking for yourself. But I think the breakdown in the trust in our infrastructure and in our governments is really shaking people. And those that believed, I had friends in 2020 that followed lockstep everything that came across from the powers that be. I don't want to get us kicked off the web here. I'll just say the powers that be. And here's what they said to me. They looked me right in the eye and they said, my government would never do anything to hurt me. And there's something to be said for that kind of living because it is certainly less stressful. They live a less stressful life until that moment. And when they began seeing the scientific papers come out of Harvard and MIT that were countering the narrative that was coming to us through the media, it shook them to the core. So I think we are on the fast track for the deprogramming. As a systems thinker and also as a scholar with a background in Gnostic traditions, all of this, we are living this ancient battle between good and evil, whether we want to call it that or not. And the way that evil triumphs is when we succumb to engaging with the evil head on. We get stuck in that ancient battle. And what you all are saying so beautifully, we don't want to fight that. We want to triumph. There's a difference between not win, triumph, to become more than. And the way we do that is by living our humanness to our innovation, our creativity, our imagination, our being able to love fearlessly and to forgive without expectation of somebody acknowledging that forgiveness. These are all, it's a deeply spiritual aspect of sovereignty. Sovereignty has to have that. And when we live our humanness, we transcend that fear. That opens the door to our sovereignty. That's how we become sovereignty. It's when we feel that we can't love fearlessly, we can't express ourselves, we can't innovate, we can't create, we're not allowed to imagine. That is evil triumphing because evil has squashed our humanness. So, and the beauty is you don't have to know any of that. Just live the best version of yourself.
I was going to go back to a point that John made about vision because, you know, there are kind of mini precedents to where we are now in history that there's been kind of these, you know, cycles and millennial periods kind of coming to a breakdown on that, and we're having revolutions. And a lot of time during these periods of revolt and revolutions, there's a wave of nihilism, anarchism and nihilism, because there's a kind of loss of purpose, a loss of being, a loss of vision. And that all gets mixed up in the revolt, which is a reactionary sense. And then after the revolution, there are social cultural changes, but structures go back together again because there haven't been a kind of a greater vision. And so I think it's important to say that there are energies of nihilism and despair they accompany this breakdown, but not to get entangled with them. And this is a kind of a global initiation for humanity. It's, you know, it's like a dark night of the soul for humanity. And through that dark night, you have to have the inner certitude that this thing we're going through is going to be through a betterment, and on a larger scale as well, for a larger vision. It's not just the personal discomfort or the personal hope. It's also connected with a greater species hope and movement. And so if we can, even if we are personally in a dark space, if we realize that we're actually part of a much grander movement, and we are connected to a purpose beyond ourselves as well as ourselves, it can perhaps pull us out of this personal kind of black hole and realize that we're in a great initiatory moment, despite the smaller moments of discomfort, because there will be discomfort. And sovereignty is cutting through the garbage and just saying, well, whatever I do, I'm going to do it from my genuine, authentic self.
And I really liked your point that, you know, if you become your authentic self, you do step into your own authority. We need a vision. We have to have a picture of a new world. We have to have an idea of what's it going to be like? What's it going to look like?
When we are able to ask ourselves the questions, what I'm seeing, is it true? And if you don't know the answer to that, you owe it to yourself to go and find that answer. Go to the original sources. So I think we've done a good job. We've given some specifics here that people can do. And I'm interested to see when we meet again, we'll have comments from this. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how we've served our community with what we've offered today.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for all your good comments. And we thank you all for being a part of this. And thank you, Penny and Greg and Kingsley. It's great to have you. Always great to have you here. And this is enjoyable for all of us. And so we look forward to seeing you all. So thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Penny, Kingsley, John, thank everyone for sharing part of your day. Pox, travel safe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Love you all.